Ensign Thaly Rivero stood on the deck of the USS Gerald Ford, watching the pilots prepare for their next mission. The sounds of engines roaring to life, the shuffle of crew members working efficiently around her, and the bustling energy of the flight deck filled the air. She was part of it all. But she was not really a part of it at all. As an aircraft maintenance officer, Thaly's job was to keep the planes running, to ensure they were in perfect condition for flight. But the dream that had been her heart's deepest desire to sit in the cockpit, feel the control under her hands, and soar through the skies was just that, a dream. One that had been denied to her because of a medical condition that still haunted her. The diagnosis was simple, a seizure she had suffered after a traumatic crash. Years ago, a condition the Navy refused to overlook. Despite the fact that the episode had never repeated, it was a flaw, an imperfection that kept her grounded. She wasn't even allowed to take part in flight training, the one thing she had longed for since childhood. Her passion for aviation was evident in every movement she made on the deck, but it was a passion that could never be fully realized. The deck crew moved like a well-oiled machine, and Thaly was a part of that machine, an important part, yet forever tethered to the ground. Every day, she worked tirelessly, fixing the planes others would fly, while she stayed behind, watching them soar. The planes, her planes, launched one after another, each of them leaving behind a trail of freedom that she would never taste. She could hear the hum of the engines, feel the vibrations under her feet, but no matter how badly she wanted to, she couldn't fly. She remembered the day she first set foot on the carrier. The excitement, the nerves, the feeling of being in the heart of military aviation, ready to prove herself. But that was before the incident, before her body betrayed her. The Navy had made its decision, and it had made it clear she was not fit to fly. Her role was now to service the jets, to ensure they were always ready for the skies, but never to join them. A mechanic, not a pilot. Sometimes, while working on the aircraft, Thaly would catch herself imagining what it would be like if she could just climb into the cockpit, feel the throttle beneath her fingertips, take control of the jet and let the world fall away. She saw the other pilots so confident, so free, and it filled her with a bitter longing. She had been trained to fix the engines, to maintain the wings, but never to take flight herself. It was as if her dream had been broken into 1,000 tiny pieces, each one scattered across the flight deck, impossible to piece together again. But Thaly never let go of that dream. No matter how many times she heard the whispers of others saying she would never make it, no matter how many regulations were thrown in her face, she held on. Each day, as she worked on the aircraft, she imagined herself soaring through the sky with the same grace and skill she had always known she possessed, and every day, she could feel it just beyond her reach. The air, the sky, the freedom she craved. Still, there was a part of her that understood the reality. She had been grounded by something beyond her control, and that was the hardest part of it all. The knowledge that she had the skill, the drive, and the passion to fly, but the system would never let her. There was no going back from the past. Her future had been decided, at least for now, but she would never stop dreaming. Not as long as there was a single plane left on that deck. In the quiet moments, when the deck was less chaotic and the planes had all taken off, Thaly would find herself alone, lost in thought. Sometimes, she would stand near the edge of the deck, looking out at the vast expanse of ocean stretching endlessly before her. The wind would whip around her and she would close her eyes, letting the sound of the waves crash against the hull of the ship fill her ears. For a moment, she could pretend that she, too, was part of the flight. But then reality would set in, and the dream would fade, only to be replaced by the familiar feeling of frustration. Despite all this, Thaly's resolve never wavered. She knew that the dream was far from over. The searing desire to fly, to be more than just a technician, was etched into her very being. It was a fire that couldn't be extinguished, no matter how impossible it seemed, no matter how many times she was told it would never happen. Thaly refused to accept it. She wasn't just fixing planes, she was preparing herself for the day when, somehow, she would take flight. The dream that wasn't meant to be was still alive, burning quietly in the back of her mind. And one day, she would find a way to make it real. The sky was still waiting for her, and Thaly would be ready when the time came. Thaly sat at a small table in the ship's mess hall, a tray of food growing cold in front of her. The bustling noise of sailors laughing and talking filled the air, but she felt isolated, as she often did. Her mind wasn't on the food or the conversations around her, but on the aircraft that were being prepped for flight just beyond the doors of the hall. The hum of the jets, the sound of engines warming up, was like a constant reminder of what she could never have. It was a stark contrast to the quiet contemplation in her heart. As she scanned the mess hall, Her gaze landed on Lieutenant Corey. Corey had just entered, laughing with a fellow pilot. But her eyes caught Thaly's across the room. The lieutenant's expression shifted, as if she recognized something in Thaly's solitude. Without saying a word, Corey made her way toward Thaly's table and sat down without asking. "How's the bird maintenance going, Rivero?" Corey asked casually, a playful smirk on her face. Thaly nodded, offering a small smile in return. "Same as always. Lieutenant, jets are ready for another round of patrols." "They always are." There was a brief silence, and then Corey spoke again, her tone softer this time. "I was looking at some of your past work on the jets. Your checks are flawless. You make sure everything's perfect." Her eyes lingered on Thaly's face as if she were trying to see something. Beyond her words, Thaly shrugged. "That's my job. Make sure they fly safely." "I'm good at it." Corey leaned in a little closer. "You're more than good at it, Rivero. You're one of the best maintenance officers on the ship." Her words were not just praise, but recognition. Thaly could feel the weight of it, but there was something else in Corey's eyes. Something softer, something knowing. The conversation shifted to a more personal note when Corey asked, You ever think about flying yourself?" Thaly's hand tightened around her fork, but she didn't look up. "I did once." Her voice was quiet, almost to herself. "But that was before, well, before the seizure. After that, the Navy made sure I stayed where I belonged." Corey studied her for a moment, her expression not judgmental, but curious. You don't think you can get past that?" Thaly shook her head, feeling the familiar weight of the restriction. "It's not something I can change. Rules are rules. The Navy doesn't bend them for anyone." She looked up at Corey, forcing a small smile. "I'm where I'm supposed to be." There was a long pause before Corey spoke again, her voice lower and more thoughtful now. "I know what it's like to have a dream that seems unreachable, to want something more than anything else, but know it's just out of reach." She exhaled slowly, as if the words she was about to share carried more weight than usual. "I've been there before, Rivero. I wasn't always a fighter pilot. I didn't just walk into the cockpit and get my wings. I worked for it, and there were plenty of people who told me I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't cut it." Thaly looked up at Corey, intrigued despite herself. What did you do?" Corey's smile was laced with a quiet understanding. "I kept going. I kept pushing myself. I didn't let anyone tell me who I could be or what I could do. And when I got to flight school, I proved them wrong." Thaly remained silent, processing Corey's words. It was something she'd heard before, but this time it felt different, like it was meant for her. "And what if you can't get past the rules?" Thaly asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Corey paused for a moment, then replied, her eyes fixed on Thaly's with a fierce sincerity. "Some rules exist to protect people, Rivero, but some rules they exist to control people. And sometimes you have to break them to prove what you're really capable of." Corey leaned back slightly, as if weighing her next words carefully. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are, especially not because of one thing in your past." Thaly felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was there, like a tiny spark in the dark. The weight of the restrictions, the rules that held her down, didn't seem quite as heavy in that moment. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way around them. "You think I can do it?" Thaly asked, her voice almost tentative. Corey's gaze softened. "I think you've already done it, Rivero. I've seen the way you work, the way you push yourself. If anyone can do the impossible, it's you." Thaly didn't respond immediately. She had always been told what she couldn't do, always told where she belonged. But now, sitting across from Lieutenant Corey, she realized how little of that had ever truly mattered to her. What mattered was the dream, and how fiercely she still held on to it. Maybe Corey was right. Maybe there was a chance. The silence stretched between them, comfortable now, like two people who understood each other without needing to say much more. Thaly's mind swirled with thoughts she had long buried, but one thought stood out, clearer than the rest. There was a way. She didn't know how or when, but there was a way to make this dream real. "I guess I never really thought about it that way," Thaly said after a beat, her voice quiet but firm. Corey smiled again, this time a little more knowing. "Sometimes, you just need someone to remind you that it's okay to dream big, and that it's okay to chase that dream, no matter what anyone says." Thaly's heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Someone else believed in her, someone who had walked a similar path. That belief, no matter how small it seemed, was all she needed to keep moving forward. As Corey stood up to leave, she gave Thaly a brief, encouraging nod. "Keep your head up, Rivero. Don't let anyone, even the Navy, tell you what you can't do." Thaly watched her go, a new fire igniting in her chest. The dream that seemed impossible suddenly didn't feel so out of reach. Thaly stood in the dimly lit simulator room, the soft hum of machinery surrounding her. The ship had long settled into its nightly routine, the sounds of the crew fading into the background. The world outside was quiet, but inside the room, she was anything but still. She had set her mind on a goal, one that felt impossible, yet here she was, alone in the darkness, preparing to break the rules she had lived by for so long. Her eyes fixed on the simulator console, the digital cockpit of an F-18 staring back at her, just like the one she'd spent years maintaining, but never flying. She slid into the seat, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she fastened the harness. The night was her only ally now. No one could know about this. No one could ever find out she was using the simulator for more than the maintenance training she was supposed to be doing. Her hands gripped the controls as she powered up the system, the simulated engines roaring to life. The reality of what she was doing, the risk of it, wasn't lost on her. But the desire to prove herself was greater than the fear. She had been grounded for too long, and now she was going to take flight in whatever way she could. The first scenario she loaded was a simple one, a routine takeoff, a controlled climb. It was the kind of thing she had memorized, had studied for hours in her manuals, but the simulation was different from anything she had ever done before. The moment her hands touched the throttle, the weight of the aircraft felt real. The joystick moved with purpose beneath her fingertips, responding to every input she made. She pushed forward, and the F-18 surged into the air. The physical sensations accelerating, climbing, gaining altitude were enough to stir something deep within her. She was doing it. She was flying. Her heart raced as she completed the first set of maneuvers. But she wasn't satisfied yet. The thrill of flying was what she had always dreamed of, but it was more than that. She was pushing herself, proving that she could do it. Despite everything that said she couldn't, she wasn't just a mechanic. She was capable of so much more. With each successive flight, she raised the stakes. The conditions became harsher, the scenarios more complex. In one, she simulated an engine failure mid-flight and had to land in a storm. The winds howled in her headphones as the rain lashed at her virtual canopy. She could feel the plane dipping, losing altitude as she fought to regain control. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. The adrenaline surged, but her mind remained calm. She was doing it, landing the plane despite the extreme conditions, her skills guiding her. The next challenge was a simulated night landing on a carrier, no lights, no guidance, and the pitch-black sea below. It was the most difficult test yet. As she approached the virtual flight deck, she could see nothing. But her mind, trained for this very moment, anticipated every shift. Her eyes flicked between the instruments, her hands adjusting the throttle and the controls with precision. The deck was a mere shadow in the distance, the only hint of its location being the faint glow of emergency lights marking the edges. She made her final approach, fighting the crosswinds and adjusting for every slight shift in altitude. It wasn't perfect, but it was a landing. Her hands shook as she powered down the simulator. The screen flashed a completion message, 100%, and she sat back in the chair, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had done it. The impossible landing, under extreme conditions, in complete darkness. She had proven to herself that she could do what they told her she couldn't. But as she reached to shut down the system, she heard a door creak open behind her. She froze. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to see Chief Petty Officer Nakamura standing in the doorway, his silhouette barely visible in the low light. "You know this is against regulations, Rivero," Nakamura said, his voice steady, but tinged with a mixture of admiration and concern. Thaly's stomach dropped, but she quickly masked her fear with a calm facade. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away from the simulator. "If you're going to report me, Chief, then do it," she said, her voice unwavering despite the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. Nakamura stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't seem angry, just thoughtful, studying her with a kind of quiet intensity. "I'm not here to report you," he said, his tone now gentler. "But you've been at this for a while. 4 times this week alone. You're pushing yourself, Rivero. What are you preparing for?" Thaly didn't immediately answer. The truth was, she didn't know what she was preparing for. She didn't even know if there was an end goal in sight. All she knew was that she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she had finally found the one thing that made her feel whole. I'm preparing for when they need me anyway, she said, her words firm. There was no doubt in her mind. Nakamura stood silently for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on her. The Navy doesn't change its mind, Rivero. They don't just let anyone fly. You know that? She turned in the seat to face him fully. Maybe they don't, but I'm not training for the Navy. She stood up slowly, facing him directly now. I'm training for when they don't have a choice. Nakamura raised an eyebrow, as if he were considering her words carefully. Finally, he nodded, though there was a hint of worry in his expression. I saw your scores. No one lands a damaged jet in hurricane conditions at night, not even in a simulation. But you did. Thaly's eyes remained steady. I know, I did. Her voice wasn't filled with pride, but with the quiet certainty that she had done what others thought impossible. Nakamura exhaled softly, running a hand through his hair. Oh, why push so hard for something they'll never let you have? He asked, almost rhetorically. Because some rules exist until they need to be broken, she replied, her words like a vow. And I intend to be ready when that moment comes. For a moment, Nakamura didn't say anything. He just watched her, a silent understanding passing between them. Finally, he sighed, his voice softening. I can't stop you. But be careful. You're walking a fine line. Thaly nodded, not in defiance, but in recognition of the weight of his words. I will be... Nakamura lingered for a moment longer before heading for the door. He paused before leaving, turning back to look at her one last time. Just know this, Rivero, you've got the skill. I can see it. Don't let the rules hold you back. And with that, he left, leaving Thaly alone in the quiet of the simulator room. The weight of his words lingered in the air, and for the first time, Thaly allowed herself to truly believe that maybe, just maybe, she was capable of the very thing they had told her was impossible. The USS Gerald Ford was at the center of a violent storm, though not the kind the crew was accustomed to. The sky above was clear, a deep blue stretching endlessly, but the threat came from the waters below. An unexpected assault hit the fleet hard, with multiple enemy ships and aircraft closing in, intent on isolating the carrier and taking it down. The deck was thrown into chaos as sailors scrambled to their posts, alarms blaring through the ship. Fighters were launched as quickly as possible, but the attack was too sudden, too coordinated. The carrier had become a target, vulnerable, exposed in the midst of a rising military conflict. Amid the chaos, a single voice broke through the noise, crackling over the intercom. Lieutenant Corey is down. Repeat. Lieutenant Corey is down. She's been hit severe injuries. We need a rescue now. The words echoed through Thaly's mind like a distant drumbeat. Her heart raced. Corey, the very pilot who had been so supportive, the one who had always encouraged her, was now in danger. Thaly stood frozen for a moment, her mind struggling to catch up to the gravity of the situation. But as the weight of it sank in, she moved. She had never flown a fighter jet. She wasn't cleared to fly, but this wasn't about clearance. This wasn't about regulations. Corey was her responsibility, and she was the only one who could get to her. Without thinking, she sprinted toward the maintenance bay, her heart pounding in her chest. There, waiting for a technician's hands to fine-tune it, stood an F-18 Super Hornet, one of the last untouched jets on deck. Her hands were already moving before she knew it. The canopy was clear, the cockpit open. The engine hummed as she climbed in, her fingers finding the familiar controls of an aircraft she had only ever dreamed of piloting. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to back away from the reckless decision she was about to make. This wasn't her aircraft. She wasn't a trained pilot, not in the eyes of the Navy. But none of that mattered now. She couldn't stand by while Corey bled out, helpless, on an enemy-occupied patch of land. The rules didn't matter. Saving a life did. Thaly's hands tightened around the controls as she started the engine, feeling the low rumble beneath her as the jet powered up. She wasn't thinking about the risks, she was thinking about getting to Corey, getting her back safely. That was all that mattered. She punched the throttle forward and taxied down the deck, her mind racing. The deck crew scrambled out of her way, unsure whether they should stop her, but, unable to intervene in the chaos, Thaly barely noticed them. She had only one goal: get into the air, find Corey, and bring her home. As she rocketed into the sky, the world blurred around her. The F-18 leapt off the deck, the force of the catapult launch nearly sending her breathless. For a moment, everything felt surreal. She was flying. She was in control of the jet, but there was no time to savor it. The urgency of the mission burned through her. each second stretching longer as the radio crackled to life with reports of Corey's location. The plane's systems began to flicker with data coordinates, terrain, and the rough conditions she would face. There was no time to question herself, no room for doubt. The radar operator's voice in her ear was steady, but tinged with fear. "You're clear of enemy radar, Rivero. But be advised, the storm is moving in. You'll be flying blind soon." The weight of the words pressed down on her. She had never done this before. The F-18, with all its power and technology, felt foreign beneath her hands. But there was no turning back now. As she approached the coordinates, the view ahead grew darker. The storm was closing in, and visibility was deteriorating fast. She couldn't afford to lose focus, not now. The cloud cover thickened, the turbulence in the air forcing her to adjust the controls constantly. The wind howled against the fuselage, and the rain lashed at her windows. She couldn't see anything, just the glow of her instruments. But she could feel the F-18 responding to her commands, each adjustment bringing her closer to the crash site. The terrain ahead was a blur of shadows, barely distinguishable from the sky. Thaly scanned the horizon, looking for the faintest sign of where Corey's plane might have gone down. Then, she spotted it far below, a small, broken silhouette half submerged in the water. It was Corey's jet, a smoking wreck with a faint emergency beacon flashing weakly in the storm. Her heart skipped a beat. There was no time to waste. She descended rapidly, the jet buffeted by the wind as she adjusted her approach. The landing would be tight. The beach was small, the strip barely enough for an emergency landing. The thought of it made her stomach churn, but she didn't allow herself to dwell on the danger. She had no choice now but to do what she had to. The jet hit the airstrip hard, the wheels bouncing on impact as she fought to steady it. She cut the throttle just in time, bringing the F-18 to a halt just feet away from the water's edge. The landing gear screeched against the pavement, and the jet shuddered. But she held the brakes, fighting the momentum with everything she had. They had made it. She had made it. Thaly wasted no time. She popped the canopy and climbed out, her boots hitting the wet sand as she ran toward Corey's wrecked plane. Corey was unconscious, blood staining her uniform, but there was still life in her. Thaly wasted no time assessing the damage. Her hands moved quickly as she secured Corey into a makeshift stretcher, using everything she had learned from her years of training in maintenance and medical procedures. The storm was closing in, and enemy patrol boats were already in sight, making their way toward them with alarming speed. Thaly's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't panic. With Corey safely strapped in, Thaly sprinted back to the F-18. The enemy was getting closer, their gunfire starting to pepper the beach as they closed in on the wreckage. Thaly climbed back into the cockpit, her movements fast and precise. As she taxied to the runway, the roar of enemy aircraft sounded in the distance. She couldn't wait any longer. The F-18's engines roared to life, and with Corey behind her, she launched back into the stormy sky. She could hear the shots echoing behind her, the sound of bullets splashing into the water as she pulled away. The F-18 darted through the storm, weaving between bursts of gunfire. Every second was a battle, every move a calculated risk. Thaly pushed the jet as hard as she could, knowing they had no time to waste. Her fingers danced over the controls, her eyes scanning the horizon for the carrier. The radio crackled to life again. "Gerald Ford, this is Rivero. I'm inbound with Lieutenant Corey. Need clearance to land." Her voice was steady, despite the whirlwind around her. "Rivero, carrier systems are down. We have no guidance, no arrestor cables. We're flying blind," came the response from the control tower. "Divert to Okinawa." "Negative, sir. Corey will not make it that far. Permission to attempt a dead stick landing," she requested, her voice unwavering. There was a pause, thick with tension. Finally, the Admiral's voice came through. "It's your call. Rivero, may God be with you." Thaly's heart pounded in her chest as she adjusted her approach, bringing the F-18 in low over the deck. The carrier was dark, barely visible against the sea. Her hands worked furiously, adjusting for the wind, for the rolling of the ship, for every shift in airspeed. This was the moment she had trained for, the moment she had dreamed of. She couldn't see the deck, but she knew it was there, and she knew what she had to do. As the carrier loomed ahead, she set her sights on the beginning of the flight deck, calculating her descent, feeling the wind tug at her. It was going to be close. It was going to be perfect. Thaly's knuckles turned white as her grip tightened on the controls. The F-18 roared through the turbulent skies, the storm clouds swallowing the horizon ahead. She had one shot, one chance to make it back to the USS Gerald Ford, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The carrier lay just ahead, barely visible against the dark sea, and she had no instruments to guide her. No landing lights, no arrestor cables. It was just her, the F-18 and her instincts. Her mind flashed back to the simulation's countless hours spent practicing for this very moment, but even in her wildest imaginings, the reality was far more chaotic. The rain lashed against her canopy, the wind howled with an almost audible fury, and the carrier's flight deck seemed to drift beneath her, unseen. The ship pitched and rolled in the waves, a moving target in a storm, and Thaly was forced to adjust her speed and altitude constantly, fighting every gust of wind. The calm of the simulator was a distant memory now. This was real, and every decision carried the weight of life and death. "Gerald Ford, this is Rivero. I'm inbound with Lieutenant Corey, requesting landing clearance," she said into the radio, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Rivero. No guidance, no arrestor cables, no landing lights. We're doing this blind. We're in emergency mode here," came the terse reply from the control tower. Thaly's pulse quickened. The familiar hum of the carrier's systems was absent, leaving only the pounding of her own heart and the roar of the F-18's engines. The absence of her usual instruments felt like a weight on her chest, as if she were flying blind. But there was no turning back. Corey's life depended on her, and she would do whatever it took to bring them both home. She adjusted her flight path, scanning the horizon for any sign of the carrier. She could barely make out the vague shape of the deck, its outline barely visible against the dark sea, but she knew it was there. The wind pushed at her aircraft, buffeting it with unpredictable gusts, forcing her to make constant adjustments to her approach. The F-18 responded with subtle shifts, small adjustments to the throttle, the trim, and the roll to keep her on course. But the margin for error was slim. If she was even a few feet off, it would be disastrous. The clouds parted momentarily, revealing a faint shimmer in the distance, the glow of emergency lights marking the edges of the flight deck. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a point of reference. She fought the urge to feel relief. It was only a glimmer of hope, not a guarantee of success. Thaly's mind raced. She had trained for this moment, but now that she was here, it felt far more daunting than any simulation. She had done this countless times in the virtual world, where the stakes were low, where failure meant nothing more than starting over. But this was life or death. She would have to nail this landing, or both she and Corey would be lost to the ocean. She continued her descent, focusing on the shifting light of the carrier's deck. The storm made everything harder, and the turbulence was unforgiving. The deck pitched violently beneath her, and the ship's movement threw off her approach. The carrier seemed to sway like a living thing beneath her, and she had to compensate for every change in its motion. The only thing that kept her steady was her training. Years of maintenance work, years of flight simulations, all of it had led to this single moment. Her fingers were numb from gripping the controls too tightly, but she couldn't afford to loosen her hold. The F-18 was responding, but the closer she got, the more unpredictable the conditions became. Every few seconds, the ship's movement seemed to shift, and she adjusted to keep herself in line with the deck. She could feel the tension in every muscle in her body, but her mind remained focused. There was no room for hesitation. There was no room for fear. The F-18 was now only a few hundred feet from the deck. The storm wind screamed as she made her final approach. The deck was coming up fast, and Thaly's eyes darted from the digital readouts to the faint lights below. She had a split second to make a decision. Too fast and she would overshoot. Too slow and she would risk stalling. The stakes were higher than ever, but she didn't waver. At the last possible moment, she gave the throttle a quick push, slightly correcting her altitude to account for a sudden gust. The carrier deck rushed up to meet her. With a deep breath, she pulled the aircraft up just enough to keep from crashing into the deck, her hands shaking slightly with the effort. The F-18 touched down with a jarring thud, the wheels screeching as they hit the runway. Thaly's stomach churned as she fought to keep control. She slammed the brakes, feeling the aircraft decelerate rapidly. The deck was too short, the momentum too strong, and she had no arrestor cables to catch her. She fought the urge to panic, focusing only on the task at hand. She applied pressure to the brakes, fighting to stop the jet as quickly as possible. The end of the deck loomed ahead, and she knew there was no more time. The F-18's wheels screeched louder, the aircraft still moving too fast. Her mind raced as she pulled the throttle back, using the reverse thrusters to slow the plane. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she forced herself to stay calm, forcing the jet to slow before it reached the edge. The F-18 stopped less than 10 feet from the edge of the deck. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the reality of what had just happened hit her like a wave. She had done it. Against all odds, she had landed the jet on a darkened, unstable carrier deck in the middle of a storm. The adrenaline was still pumping through her veins, but her mind began to clear. She had saved Corey. She had done the impossible. The emergency lights blinked to life across the flight deck, illuminating the scene in stark, sterile white. The ground crew rushed to the plane, their shouts and movements a blur of activity as they reached her aircraft. But Thaly was already unstrapping herself from the seat, her focus still on the task at hand. Corey's life depended on the next few minutes. She climbed out of the cockpit, her legs shaky but her steps steady. The medics were already there, preparing to take Corey off the plane. As the team carefully moved Corey from the jet, Thaly felt a brief sense of satisfaction, a fleeting moment of relief. They had made it. Her radio buzzed again. The voice from the control tower now filled with awe. "Rivero, that was the most incredible landing I've ever seen. Get to medical. You've earned it." Thaly didn't respond. There was no need. The mission wasn't over yet. The carrier was still under threat, and there was still work to be done. But for now, she had done what she had set out to do. Corey was alive, and they were both safe for now. The moment the F-18's wheels touched the deck and the aircraft came to a halt, a deafening roar of applause erupted from the flight crew. The deck crew, who had watched in stunned silence as the jet made its impossible landing, now broke into cheers, their voices blending with the sound of the storm that still raged around them. Thaly sat frozen in the cockpit for a moment, hands still gripping the controls, the engine's hum still ringing in her ears. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't from relief. It was the weight of what she had just done, what she had just risked. She had saved Corey. She had done the impossible. But she knew that in the world of the military, there were consequences. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and the reality of her actions started to settle in. What she had done taking an aircraft she wasn't cleared to fly, disobeying orders could lead to a court-martial. The cheers from the crew were a distant sound now, nothing more than a backdrop to the anxiety gnawing at her gut. Commander Vance, who had watched the landing from the command center, stormed onto the flight deck, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. Thaly unclipped herself from the seat and made her way down the ladder. The moment her feet hit the deck, she was met by Vance, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with anger. "Rivero," he said, his voice low and tense. "That was the most reckless, insubordinate act I've ever witnessed on this ship. You've put yourself, your crew, and the entire carrier at risk." Thaly stood tall, the weight of the reprimand sinking in. She knew it was coming. She could feel the eyes of the crew on her, watching, waiting for her to break. But she didn't flinch. "I accept full responsibility. Commander," she said, her voice steady, "I did what needed to be done to save a life." Vance looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, much to Thaly's surprise, he raised his hand in a sharp salute. "That was the finest piece of flying I've ever seen," he said, his voice softening. "And that's the only reason you're still standing here." Thaly's breath caught in her throat. She had expected anger, maybe a reprimand, but this was something different. Commander Vance, who had always been so rigid, so bound by protocol, was acknowledging the impossible feat she had pulled off. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a sign that, despite everything, her actions had been recognized. Before she could respond, Admiral Bryce, a towering figure on the deck, approached her. His face was grim, but there was something in his eyes, something that told Thaly he was not there to condemn her. He had seen everything from his post on the command bridge, and now he was here to speak with her directly. "Ensign Rivero," he said, his voice low but firm. "That landing was nothing short of miraculous. You saved Lieutenant Corey's life, and you kept this carrier from falling into enemy hands." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "But you also broke every regulation in the book." Thaly nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I know, sir, but I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The rules didn't matter in that moment." Bryce studied her for a moment longer, then sighed. "Sometimes the extraordinary demands breaking the rules, but you need to understand that the Navy doesn't take kindly to insubordination." He hesitated, then added, "That being said, I've read your file. Ensign, I know what you've been through. You've earned the right to be more than just a mechanic. You've proven that." Thaly felt a flicker of hope in her chest, but she didn't allow herself to feel too relieved. She knew the road ahead was uncertain. "What does that mean?" Sir Bryce's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "It means that your actions won't be overlooked, but there are still consequences to be faced. For now, I want you to report to medical for evaluation. Get some rest, Rivero. You've earned it." Thaly stood there for a moment, stunned by the Admiral's words. There was a part of her that wanted to smile, to bask in the recognition, but she knew better. Her actions might have saved Corey's life, but they had also put her entire career at risk. And the real consequences were still waiting for her. As she made her way toward the medical bay, the crew's cheers faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own thoughts. The recognition was bittersweet. She had done what was necessary, but she had also broken the very system she had sworn to serve. How would the Navy view her now? Would they see her as a hero? Or would they see her as a rule breaker who put them all at risk? In the medical bay, she found Corey lying on a cot. Her injuries serious but not life-threatening. The medics were tending to her, and she appeared to be recovering well. Thaly approached her cautiously, unsure of what to say. Corey's eyes fluttered open as she saw Thaly standing there. "Ah, there she is," Corey said weakly, a smile flickering across her face. "The maintenance officer who stole my thunder." Thaly smiled back, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "How are you feeling?" "Lieutenant, like I was shot out of the sky and then rescued by someone who's not supposed to be able to fly," Corey replied with a wince. "You know, I've been through some crazy stuff in my career, but that landing, that was something else." Thaly's smile faded slightly as she sat down beside her. "I did what I had to do," she said quietly. "I couldn't leave you behind." Corey's eyes softened. "Well, for what it's worth, I think we all know who you are now. Rivero." The words hung in the air between them, a quiet affirmation of everything Thaly had worked toward. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She wasn't just a disqualified pilot. She was more than that. And no matter what happened next, she would never be the same. Later that evening, Thaly was summoned to Admiral Bryce's office. She stood at attention as he reviewed her file, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood Commander Vance, who had already made it clear that Thaly's actions had earned his respect. "Rivero," Bryce said, his voice measured, "your actions have saved lives. Your skills are undeniable. But you've violated multiple regulations, and you must answer for that." Thaly's heart sank. She had known this moment would come, but it still felt like a blow to her chest. "That being said," Bryce continued, his tone shifting slightly, "the Navy recognizes exceptional service when it sees it. You have proven your worth. I am submitting a recommendation that your medical restriction be lifted." Thaly's breath caught in her throat. "You mean I can fly again?" Bryce nodded. "You have more than earned the right. You're being reassigned to a flight squadron. The rest will be determined by your future actions. But for now, you are officially a naval aviator." A wave of emotion washed over Thaly: relief, pride, and an overwhelming sense of achievement. This wasn't the end of her journey, but it was a new beginning. She had fought for this moment, and now it was hers. As she left Bryce's office, a sense of quiet pride filled her chest. The Navy had recognized her, not just as a technician, but as someone who could defy the odds, and she had proven to herself and to everyone else that some rules were meant to be broken. The day had come. Thaly stood in the ceremonial hall, the soft murmur of fellow sailors and officers filling the room. But all she could hear was the steady beating of her heart. She had always been on the periphery, working tirelessly to ensure the planes flew, but now she was standing at the very heart of the Navy's aviation community. Her transformation was complete. The years of struggle, the silent yearning to be in the skies, had led to this single moment. Today, she was not a maintenance officer, not a disqualified pilot. Today, she was officially a naval aviator. Admiral Bryce stood before her, his usual stern demeanor softened by a rare smile. "Ensign Thaly Rivero," he began, his voice resonating through the room. "You have proven yourself not only as a technician but as a pilot capable of defying the odds. In recognition of your courage and dedication, I'm proud to officially present you with your wings." The crowd fell silent as Bryce reached into the box at his side and pulled out the insignia that would mark Thaly's new identity. Thaly's hands trembled slightly as the wings were pinned to her chest. The weight of them, though small in physical form, felt monumental. It was as if the years of striving, the moments of doubt, and the reckless decision to break the rules had culminated in this single, defining moment. She was no longer just a bystander in the world of aviation. She was now a part of it, fully and irrevocably. The applause from her fellow officers and sailors washed over her, but it was the quiet, personal sense of fulfillment that truly resonated within her. She had earned this, and for the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged. Later, as the ceremony ended and the crew returned to their stations, Thaly found herself in a small briefing room with her new squadron. The shift from maintenance to flight had been rapid, but she was ready. She had done everything she could to prepare herself for this moment, And now the time had come to take her first mission as a naval aviator. Lieutenant Corey, still recovering from her injuries but now fully conscious and mobile, gave Thaly an encouraging nod from across the room. Thaly returned the gesture with a smile. There was a bond between them now, forged in the crucible of battle, trust, and shared experiences. Corey had been the catalyst for Thaly's ultimate transformation. But now, as Thaly looked around at her new squadron, she realized that her journey had only just begun. As she suited up and made her way to the aircraft, the weight of her new role settled in. This was not just a job. This was a calling. She had spent years learning to maintain the jets, understanding their inner workings better than anyone else. Now, she would learn to be the one controlling them, navigating the skies with the same precision she had once used to fix them. The moment she climbed into the cockpit of the F-18, everything felt natural. The hum of the engines, the feel of the controls beneath her hands, it all felt familiar, like the pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Her mind, once consumed with the mechanical processes of flight, now focused on the task at hand, a successful mission. The Navy had put its trust in her, and she wouldn't let them down. The takeoff was smooth, and as the jet soared into the sky, Thaly could feel the exhilaration of flight course through her. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now she was living it. The landscape below became a blur, the world shrinking as she climbed higher, the clouds parting in front of her. The freedom of the open sky was intoxicating, but she kept her focus. This wasn't a moment for celebration, it was a moment for action. Her squadron flew in tight formation, and Thaly found herself seamlessly blending into the rhythm of the flight. Each maneuver, each shift in speed or altitude, felt instinctual, as though the jet had become an extension of herself. She could feel the years of training both in the simulator and in the real world coming together in perfect harmony. She wasn't just flying the jet, she was commanding it, every movement deliberate, every decision critical. The mission ahead was straightforward, but the reality of combat was always lurking just beneath the surface. As they approached their target area, the atmosphere grew tenser. Thaly's heart rate picked up, but she remained calm, focused. This was what she had trained for, what she had fought for. There would be no turning back now. As the squadron dove into the target zone, Thaly's mind was clear. She was doing exactly what she had always wanted, flying, commanding, contributing in a way she had never imagined possible. The mission was a success, and as they turned to return to the carrier, Thaly couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From the quiet, grounded technician to the bold pilot soaring through the sky. It had been a long road, but now she was exactly where she was meant to be. Back on the USS Gerald Ford, the squadron landed one by one. Thaly touched down last, the landing smooth and precise. As she taxied to the hangar, her chest swelled with pride. She had done it. The first mission as a naval aviator was behind her, and she had done it without a hitch. As she climbed out of the cockpit, the ground crew, who had once seen her only as a mechanic, now gave her the nod of respect she had earned. She felt a sense of camaraderie, of belonging, that she had never experienced before. The transition from maintenance officer to pilot had been a hard-fought battle, but now it felt like she had finally found her place in the Navy. Later that evening, as the sun set over the vast ocean, Thaly stood on the deck, gazing out at the horizon. The roar of the jets had faded, and the sky was tinged with soft hues of pink and gold. The world felt endless, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had truly found her purpose. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but she was ready. This was just the beginning.